And of course, we talked about this earlier this week, and we're so glad that you're here to make a commentary on the conviction of Maria Shepherd, who pleaded guilty 25 years ago to killing her 3-year-old stepdaughter, and that's been overturned because of the testimony of Charles Smith, the pathologist, who was then found to, I mean, there are, I don't know how many cases now, he was used as an expert witness serially. I mean, he was almost on
He was the witness and treated like the god of pediatric pathology. And I remember I had, sadly, a couple of cases, and he was just so revered that other experts you would go to wouldn't challenge his opinion. And he was completely unchecked in his own analysis. There was no safeguards and checks in place to double-check what he was doing. And he was the linchpin for a number of wrongful convictions, and it only came out years later. So what's important, I think, about this and what to talk about is the power of an expert, a power of expert testimony in a trial, and how it can drive a conviction, even in a case when somebody's innocent. And because you're faced with such overwhelming evidence, in this case, like many others, an accused, a woman who was not responsible for the death, had to plead guilty to a manslaughter charge, receive a jail sentence, and live with that stigma for many years. And if not for the analysis done on his work and the public inquiry, she could very well have been living with that wrongful conviction.
Well, the other thing, too, is at the time, people hear, well, she pled guilty. Well, the fact is, she told police that she pushed the child once. Now, what happened was her wrist, with a watch, hit the back of the little girl's head.
Yes.
And she said she didn't believe that blow could have killed her.
Right.
But she was then, the lawyer consulted an outside expert who agreed with Smith's theory, and so that prompted her to plead guilty to manslaughter. I mean, how horrible.
Right, but this underscores the danger of expert evidence. And yes, this is pathology and there's a science to it, but there's also a fair degree of interpretation, and there must be safeguards in place. But let's roll this out more. There were wrongful convictions that were overturned in sexual assault cases, where DNA evidence was faulty or not examined, or certain biological evidence was not examined. So an individual who was exonerated by the Court of Appeal a number of years ago, who had served a number of years in jail on sexual assault charges, after other evidence was analyzed, was another type of wrongful conviction. So we have to be very careful about the quality of evidence in any case, whether it is a homicide, a sexual assault, a robbery, whatever. We have to be very careful about the quality of evidence that's used to convict people. And more importantly, we have to have careful scrutiny of what is so-called expert evidence, because there's expert evidence in so many forms. And the test for expert evidence, for leaving aside this case that has, real scientific sort of drapings about it, there's other expert evidence where witnesses come forward who are not scientists. They come forward about their own experience, about how people behave in certain cases, about tattoos and what they mean. I mean, we have to be really careful in our justice system about the weight that we attribute to expert evidence, so that it does not lead a jury to convict, because it has such incredible, you have somebody who's nicely dressed up there with all the trappings of an expert, it has incredible power with a jury, and incredible power in this case with convincing an innocent woman to plead guilty.
Click the channel subscribe button for full-length interviews and more from What She Said here on YouTube.